We're about to dive deep into one of the most uncomfortable truths about self-sabotage and how we might be unknowingly toxic to ourselves. I'm not talking about the surface-level stuff like procrastination or bad habits. I mean the deep, hidden signs that 99% of people don't even realize are affecting them daily. And the scariest part, these behaviors often disguise themselves as normal or even healthy. But they're not. They're quietly eroding your mental health, your self-worth, and your relationships. Stay with me for a moment because this is going to be a transformative journey. You might feel a little uncomfortable, but trust me, we're not just identifying the problem, we're going to talk about how to fix it. So, are you ready to discover the 5 hidden signs that you're toxic to yourself? Psychologists have found that the way you talk to yourself matters more than most people realize. There was an experiment conducted where participants were asked to complete a difficult task. Half of the participants were encouraged to use positive self-talk, while the other half were allowed to dwell in their natural, often negative, self-talk. The results: those who engaged in positive self-talk performed significantly better. But here's the kicker: most of us are not even aware of the constant stream of negativity we feed ourselves. It's like we've made a habit out of criticizing our every move. Click subscribe to this channel to get more insights into human psychology. This leads me to the first hidden sign. Are you speaking to yourself in a way that you would never speak to a friend? If the answer is yes, then you're being toxic to yourself. You wouldn't tell your best friend they're a failure for making a small mistake, right? Yet, you do this to yourself all the time. And the worst part, over time, this constant negativity becomes your reality. You start believing that you're not good enough, not smart enough, not capable enough. But how do we undo years of this self-inflicted harm? It starts with awareness. The next time you catch yourself spiraling into negative self-talk, stop. Literally, just stop. Psychologists call this cognitive restructuring. You interrupt the negative pattern and replace it with something more constructive. Instead of saying, "I'm so stupid for doing that," you might say, "Everyone makes mistakes. I'll learn from this." It sounds simple, but over time, it's life-changing. Now, let's talk about the second hidden sign, and this one is tricky because it often masquerades as self-care, avoiding discomfort at all costs. Let me ask you something. When was the last time you intentionally did something that made you uncomfortable? I'm not talking about physical discomfort, but psychological discomfort. Maybe it's having a tough conversation with someone you care about, taking on a challenge you're nervous about, or confronting an issue that's been nagging at you for a while. Psychological studies have shown that growth happens outside of our comfort zones. But here's the problem: we've become masters at avoiding discomfort. We distract ourselves with entertainment, social media, food, anything that keeps us from facing the uncomfortable truths in our lives. But this avoidance is toxic because it keeps you stuck. You're essentially telling yourself, "I'm not strong enough to handle this," and so you never grow. One experiment that highlights this beautifully is the marshmallow test. You've probably heard of it. Kids were given a marshmallow and told they could eat it now, or if they waited, they'd get 2 marshmallows later. The kids who were able to delay gratification, the ones who were willing to sit in that discomfort, ended up having better life outcomes in terms of success, relationships, and happiness. What does this tell us? That the ability to sit with discomfort, to not avoid it, is a key to long-term fulfillment. So, how does this apply to you? If you've been avoiding discomfort, it's time to face it. Set a small goal that makes you uncomfortable. Maybe it's having that tough conversation you've been putting off, Or maybe it's stepping into a new role at work that scares you. Whatever it is, lean into it. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. Now, let's move to the third hidden sign, and this one is a little more subtle, but just as damaging. You're constantly comparing yourself to others and coming up short. We live in an age where it's easier than ever to compare ourselves to everyone else. Social media has turned our lives into a constant highlight reel, and it's nearly impossible not to feel like we're falling behind. But here's the thing: comparison is the thief of joy. And more than that, it's toxic to your mental health. Psychological studies have shown that people who frequently compare themselves to others are more likely to experience feelings of envy, depression, and low self-esteem. In one study, participants who were asked to compare themselves to people they viewed as better than them reported feeling significantly worse about their own lives, even though nothing about their actual circumstances had changed. It's all in the mind. But how do we stop this toxic cycle of comparison? One way is to practice gratitude. I know it sounds cliché, but there's real science behind it. When you focus on what you do have rather than what you don't, you start to rewire your brain to feel more content. In one experiment, participants who wrote down 3 things they were grateful for every day for just 1 week reported higher levels of happiness and lower levels of depressive symptoms. It's not magic, it's psychology. So the next time you catch yourself scrolling through Instagram and feeling like you'll never measure up, stop. Shift your focus to what you're grateful for in your own life. It's a small but powerful way to break the cycle of self-toxicity. We've already uncovered 3 powerful hidden signs that you might be toxic to yourself: negative self-talk, avoiding discomfort at all costs, and constant comparison to others. But there are 2 more signs that are just as subtle and just as destructive. These last 2 might hit even deeper because they're often things we think are helping us, but in reality, they're creating an internal environment of self-sabotage. Let's jump right into the 4th hidden sign: you're stuck in a cycle of perfectionism and never feel good enough. Perfectionism is a sneaky form of self-toxicity because it often disguises itself as a positive trait. You might think, I just have high standards, or I'm striving to be the best version of myself. But here's the harsh truth: perfectionism is not about being your best, it's about fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of not being accepted. And it's toxic because it sets you up for a life of constant disappointment. There's a psychological experiment that sheds light on this. Researchers conducted a study where 2 groups of people were asked to complete a creative task. One group was told to focus on making their work perfect, while the other group was encouraged to focus on just getting it done, even if it wasn't perfect. The results? The Just Get It Done group not only finished faster, but their work was judged to be more creative and higher quality. Why? Because when you're not obsessing over perfection, you free up mental space for creativity and problem solving. You're not paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. But here's where perfectionism becomes toxic: it creates a constant state of dissatisfaction. No matter how much you achieve, it's never good enough. You might finish a project, reach a goal, or even receive praise from others, but instead of feeling proud, you immediately start focusing on what you could have done better. This constant self-criticism erodes your self-esteem over time. It's like you're setting a bar for yourself that's always just out of reach. So, how do we break free from this cycle? One powerful technique is something called self-compassion, a concept developed by psychologist Dr. Christine Neff. Self-compassion means treating yourself with the same kindness and understanding that you would offer a good friend. It's about accepting that you're human, that you will make mistakes, and that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love and success. In fact, studies have shown that people who practice self-compassion are more resilient, more motivated, and experience less anxiety and depression. Here's a practical exercise you can try the next time you find yourself caught in the trap of perfectionism. Take a step back and ask yourself, what would I say to a friend who was feeling this way? Then say those same words to yourself. You'll be amazed at how this simple shift can change your entire mindset. Now, let's move on to the final hidden sign. And this one can be the hardest to recognize because it often feels like you're being responsible or even helping others. The fifth hidden sign is you're constantly putting others' needs ahead of your own, to the point where you neglect yourself. This is what psychologists refer to as people-pleasing. And while it might seem like a noble quality, being kind, helpful, and always there for others, it quickly becomes toxic when you do it at the expense of your own well-being. People pleasers often struggle with boundaries. They say yes to things they don't want to do. They avoid conflict at all costs, and they constantly put others' needs ahead of their own, thinking that if they just keep everyone else happy, they'll feel happy too. But that's not how it works. There's a fascinating study where participants were asked to help someone with a task. Some participants were allowed to set boundaries and choose how much they wanted to help, while others were pressured into helping even when they didn't want to. The results were clear. Those who were able to set boundaries felt more positive about helping and experienced less resentment. But those who felt pressured into helping reported higher levels of stress, burnout, and resentment. This study highlights the psychological toll that people-pleasing takes on us when we don't set healthy boundaries. At its core, people-pleasing is toxic because it leads to self-neglect. You end up ignoring your own needs, desires, and emotional health in an attempt to keep everyone else happy. And over time, this leads to burnout, frustration, and even resentment toward the very people you're trying to please. It's a cycle that leaves you feeling exhausted and unfulfilled. So, how do you break free from this toxic pattern? It starts with learning to set boundaries, and I know that can be terrifying, especially if you've spent your whole life avoiding conflict or trying to keep the peace. But here's the thing, boundaries are not about being selfish or pushing people away. They're about protecting your mental and emotional health. In fact, boundaries strengthen relationships because they allow you to show up as your best self, rather than as someone who is resentful or burnt out. Here's a practical tip from psychology: start small. You don't have to overhaul your whole life overnight. Begin by setting one small boundary this week. Maybe it's saying no to a social event you don't want to attend, or maybe it's asking for help with a task that you usually take on yourself. The key is to start practicing saying no when you need to, and to recognize that your needs are just as important as everyone else's. Now, let's take a moment to reflect on everything we've uncovered so far. Negative self-talk, that inner critic that's constantly tearing you down, is not helping you, it's toxic. Start practicing conscious awareness and cognitive restructuring. Avoiding discomfort. Growth only happens when we step outside our comfort zones. Challenge yourself to face discomfort head-on rather than avoiding it. Comparing yourself to others. Comparison is the thief of joy. Focus on gratitude and what you have, rather than what others have. Perfectionism. Perfectionism is not about being your best, it's about fear. Practice self-compassion and allow yourself to be human. People-pleasing, putting others' needs ahead of your own without boundaries, leads to self-neglect. Start small and practice setting healthy boundaries. These 5 hidden signs are powerful because they often operate below the surface of our awareness. But once you recognize them, you can begin to take steps to change them, and that's where real transformation happens. So, let me leave you with this. Take a moment today to reflect on which of these signs resonates with you the most. Where do you see yourself falling into these toxic patterns? And more importantly, what's one small step you can take today to start breaking free from them? You have the power to change these patterns, but it starts with awareness and small, consistent actions. And remember, you're not alone in this journey. We all struggle with self-toxicity in some form or another, but the key is to recognize it and take steps to heal from it. At this point, we've unpacked 5 deep, hidden signs of self-toxicity: negative self-talk, avoiding discomfort, comparison, perfectionism, and people-pleasing. Now that we've identified these destructive patterns, let's talk about how to actually break free from them. Because it's one thing to know you're being toxic to yourself, but it's a whole other challenge to shift these behaviors and create a healthier relationship with yourself. Before we dive into the solutions, let me ask you something. How often do you notice the way you speak to yourself, the way you treat yourself? Most of us go through life on autopilot, unaware of the subtle but constant stream of thoughts and behaviors that shape our reality. And if you don't consciously recognize these patterns, how can you ever hope to change them? This is where the concept of self-awareness comes in. It's the foundation for breaking free from self-toxicity. There's a famous psychological experiment called the rubber hand illusion, where participants are made to feel as though a rubber hand is their own hand. The experiment is designed to show how easily our perceptions can be manipulated. If you can believe that a rubber hand is part of your body, imagine how easily your mind can trick you into believing negative things about yourself. That's why self-awareness is so critical. Without it, you're at the mercy of your own mind's illusions. So how do you build self-awareness? One effective method is mindfulness. Mindfulness is about paying attention to your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in the present moment without judgment. It's not about trying to change anything at first, it's just about observing. When you start to practice mindfulness, you'll begin to notice the subtle ways you engage in self-toxicity, the offhand comments you make to yourself, the way you avoid challenging situations, or the moments you compare yourself to others. Here's a practical exercise. Set aside 5 minutes each day to simply sit in silence and observe your thoughts. Don't try to control them, just let them come and go, like clouds passing in the sky. Over time, this practice will help you become more aware of the toxic patterns in your mind, and eventually, you'll be able to catch them as they happen. This is the first step toward breaking the cycle, becoming aware of the automatic thoughts and behaviors that are holding you back. Now let's talk about the next step, rewiring your brain. Once you've developed self-awareness, the next challenge is to actively change the patterns that are no longer serving you. And this is where the concept of neuroplasticity comes in. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections. In other words, your brain is not fixed, it can change based on your thoughts and behaviors. There's a fascinating study that illustrates this. In one experiment, participants were asked to practice playing a simple melody on the piano for 2 weeks. Another group was asked to simply imagine playing the melody without actually touching the piano. The results. Both groups showed similar changes in the motor cortex of their brains, the part responsible for controlling movement. This study shows that even imagining a new behavior can begin to rewire your brain. So, What does this mean for you? It means that every time you catch yourself engaging in one of these toxic behaviors, negative self-talk, perfectionism, comparison, etc., and consciously choose to act differently, you're literally rewiring your brain. Over time, these new, healthier behaviors will become your default way of thinking and acting. Let's break it down into practical steps. Challenge negative thoughts the next time you catch yourself engaging in negative self-talk. Pause and ask yourself, is this thought really true? Is there evidence to support it? Often you'll realize that your mind is exaggerating or catastrophizing. By questioning these thoughts, you weaken their hold on you. Lean into discomfort. Remember how we talked about avoiding discomfort being toxic. The next time you're faced with a situation that makes you uncomfortable, instead of avoiding it, consciously choose to face it. Start small. Maybe it's something as simple as speaking up in a meeting or trying a new activity that makes you a little nervous. Over time, you'll build resilience, and discomfort will become less scary. Practice gratitude to combat the toxic cycle of comparison. Make gratitude a daily habit. At the end of each day, write down 3 things you're grateful for. These don't have to be big things, just small moments of joy or appreciation. This practice trains your brain to focus on what you have rather than what you lack. Embrace imperfection. If you struggle with perfectionism, start by setting good enough goals. Instead of aiming for perfection, aim for progress. For example, if you're working on a project, set a goal to complete 80% of it to a good standard, rather than striving for 100% perfection. This shift in mindset will help you let go of the need to be flawless and focus on getting things done. Set boundaries. If people-pleasing is your toxic pattern, practice setting small boundaries this week. Maybe you say no to one request that you would normally say yes to out of guilt. Or maybe you carve out a little time for yourself each day, even if it's just 10 minutes. Setting boundaries is not about being selfish, it's about protecting your mental and emotional well-being. Now, I want to introduce another concept that's closely tied to breaking free from self-toxicity, self-acceptance. This is a hard one because it's not something we're taught to do. We're taught to strive, to improve, to be better. But here's the paradox: you can't truly grow and change unless you first accept yourself as you are. Self-acceptance doesn't mean you stop striving for growth. It means you acknowledge that you're worthy and valuable right now, flaws and all. There's an interesting psychological phenomenon called the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's the idea that what you believe about yourself becomes your reality. If you believe you're not good enough, you'll unconsciously act in ways that reinforce that belief. But if you start to believe that you are worthy, that you are enough as you are, you'll begin to act in ways that reflect that belief. Your actions will align with your self-worth. Here's a practical exercise to help you build self-acceptance. Every morning, stand in front of the mirror and say one positive thing about yourself. It might feel awkward at first, but over time, this practice will help you shift from self-criticism to self-acceptance. You're literally training your brain to see yourself in a more positive light. As we wrap up this journey together, I want to leave you with a final thought. Healing from self-toxicity is a process, not a destination. You're not going to wake up tomorrow and suddenly be free from all these toxic patterns. But that's okay. The key is to take small, consistent steps every day. Over time, these small changes will add up to a profound transformation. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. We all struggle with self-toxicity in some form or another. But the fact that you're here, reading this, means that you're already on the path to healing. You've taken the first step by becoming aware of these hidden signs, and now you have the tools to start making changes. So, I'll ask you one last, deep question. What's the one thing you can do today, right now, that will move you closer to breaking free from self-toxicity? Whether it's challenging a negative thought, setting a boundary, or simply practicing gratitude, take that one small step today. Because each small step you take brings you closer to living a life free from the toxic patterns that have been holding you back. Thank you for being here, for being willing to face the uncomfortable truths about yourself, and for taking the first steps toward change. You deserve to live a life where you are kind to yourself, where you embrace discomfort and growth, and where you feel truly worthy and enough, just as you are. Now, go out there and take that next step. You've got this.